We are on the shore of Lake Michigan, at the boundary of Illinois and Indiana, looking at one of the oldest, if not the oldest, structure in the entire Chicago, Northwest Indiana area. It is the boundary marker between the state of Illinois and Indiana. It was placed approximately in 1838 on the shores here of Lake Michigan. It runs in a dead straight north-south axis, 159 miles to where the Wabash River forms the boundary between the two states in the southern part of Indiana. This monument was moved here in the late 1980s from a point about 200 feet south of us where it originally stood when that was likely the shore of Lake Michigan. And now it's been made into a very nice sort of park for people to understand the historic significance of this structure. It's composed of sandstone, likely quarried somewhere in the Indiana area. I can tell by the fossils in it that it's probably from the Mississippian or Devonian age rocks that we have a lot of in central Indiana. The original concept for having a monument here was created in about 1821 after Illinois and Indiana were both made states in 1816 and 1818 respectively. Originally it was likely a wooden structure, and of course wood is not going to last very long, so 15 or so years later, by 1838, a larger stone structure was commissioned in an obelisk type form that was similar to other markers that had already been placed in other parts of the country, but it was not part of a settlement or a village. It was strictly a boundary marker between the two states. Unfortunately, over the years, it was sitting on the shores of Lake Michigan with basically nothing else, no other development around it. It was simply a surveying point. As land was added, as railroads started to come through the area by the late 1840s, the monument sort of was on the other side now of the lake and on railroad property, and more modern surveying techniques, people sort of didn't use this type of thing. They didn't need it. It fell into sort of disrepair, forgottenness, and that's how it sat for probably 100 years. Locals may have come by. There was some defacing of the monument. The original bronze plaques that marked Illinois and Indiana were removed. But it was because it was on private property on the other side of active railroad tracks that most people would not have gotten to it. Some local preservationists, including the Eastside Historical Society from Chicago, and a man named Benson, who was the plant manager here at Commonwealth Edison. They realized the historic nature of the structure and were able to obtain the rights to move the structure from the pad just south of us 191 feet to outside the entrance to the State Line Power Plant in 1988. The plant was still active then for another 20 years, so local workers would know it, come by and see this, whether they knew what it was or not, but it was just sort of at least moved where people could see it, but really had no context then. It's only in the last 10 years that the state of Indiana, the city of Hammond, and Chicago have worked together to make this little plaza, put some informational kiosks up, including the really nice little boundary marker here, preserve it a little better, and you can see now that this is an important structure. You'll see tourists coming through here on bicycles, because you can come through bicycle from Calumet Park, Chicago, all the way through into Indiana. And the location and reconstruction of the park actually makes this a very nice monument for a lot of reasons. In the background you can see the Art Deco facade of the original Commonwealth Edison power generating plant that was here for almost 100 years. It actually sits on Indiana property, but it was owned by Commonwealth Edison generating power for Illinois. It was torn down in the early 2010s, but the Art Deco structure was deemed historic. This is an important piece of history for Northwest Indiana, for Chicago, and for the general Calumet area, because it's one of the oldest if not the oldest structure that still stands from the early 1800s. If you think about it, most buildings were wood, and even though there are officially a couple houses in Chicago that may have been built before then, they've probably been rebuilt, as we see now. This is still the original structure, as stone is not going to change. And so it's very nice that by the 1980s, plant manager Benson and Southeast Chicago Historical Society had gotten together to realize the importance of this structure. It links history to the development of the area that we see now over the 180 years or so since it was constructed.